This is a story about the very beginning. Not just the start of the world we see, but the start of trust, of choice, of love. And what happens when something beautiful is broken? You've heard the names: Adam, Eve, the garden, the fruit. But what really happened? What if I told you this isn't just a story about the past? It's a mirror, a reflection of us. Let's go back to where everything began and everything changed. But the garden wasn't gone. Not really. Not entirely. It was veiled. Not vanished. Buried. But not broken. It lingered in the silence between prayers, in the pause before tears fall, in the yearning that no success, no substance, no human touch can ever truly satisfy. Eden became a memory, etched not in stone, but in soul. A shadow behind every home we try to build, a longing behind every love we try to hold, a whisper behind every story of hope. The gates were shut. The sword turned, flashing. But even then, God did not walk away. He stayed. Not in the garden's perfection, but in our dust, in our exile, in our rebellion, in our ruin. He followed, not as a warden, but as a father, watching over his wandering children. He saw the rise of nations and the fall of men. Cain's rage, Noah's flood, Babel's pride. He saw kings build thrones of blood, prophets mocked and murdered, altars defiled, heaven ignored. Still, he whispered, in burning bushes, in trembling mountains, in desert winds and pregnant silences, through voices no one listened to, through signs no one understood. And again, he promised, I will come, not to crush, but to carry, not to demand sacrifice, but to become it, not as fire, but as flesh. And then, he did. God came down, not wrapped in armor, but in vulnerability. A child, naked, helpless, holy, laid in straw, hunted by kings, raised in obscurity. He laughed. He cried. He scraped his knees. He learned to walk, to speak, to be human. Jesus, the echo of Eden in human skin. The Word made flesh. The promise made real. He walked not in perfection, but in broken streets. He dined with sinners, touched the diseased, listened to the ignored. He knelt beside the bleeding, and lifted up the condemned. And every step he took was a step back toward Eden. He was tempted, not by fruit, but by fame, not by a lie, but by a shortcut. And still, he chose obedience, even when it led to agony, to betrayal, to wood and nails. On a cross raised high, he took on the curse. The thorns that grew from the ground we once ruled now pierced his brow. The serpent struck, with lies, with cruelty, with death. And for a moment, it looked like the garden was lost forever. The sky went dark. The ground split. The veil tore. And then, silence. But even that was not the end, because death was never the end. It was only the door. And on the third day, breath returned. Light broke through, and the tomb was emptied. He rose, not just to defeat death, but to reopen Eden. Not the Eden of the past, but a greater garden still to come. One that death can never touch again. A place of wholeness, of healing, of home, where shame dies forever, where sin is just a memory, powerless, forgotten. Now the way is open, not guarded by flame, but by grace. No sword, no fear, just an invitation. To all who hide, to all who ache, to all who feel like they've wandered too far. He whispers, "Come home." To the weary, he offers rest. To the wounded, he brings healing. To the sinner, he gives covering. To the lost, a path. Because Eden isn't just behind us. A garden remade. A world reborn. A tree, this time of life, not knowledge, standing tall at the center. No serpent. No shame. No shadow. Just light. Just love. Just him. And in that place, tears are wiped away. Time ends. Eternity begins. And we walk with him again. Not as exiles, but as children. Face to face. Hand in hand. Heart to heart. No hiding. No running. No more fig leaves. Just us. And him. Back in the garden. But this time. Forever. But how do you hide? From the one who shaped your dust and gave it breath? How do you outrun the footsteps of the very one who walked with you in the cool of the day? Still, they tried. Every crack of a twig, every flicker of light through the leaves, felt like judgment, felt like exposure, felt like fear. The garden, once a symphony, now sang in minor keys. Birdsong turned hollow. Wind, once comforting, now whispered blame. And then they heard him, God, walking, not thundering, not shouting, just walking, like he always did, calling out, Adam, where are you? Not because he didn't know, but because love still speaks, even when hearts hide. Adam's voice cracked through the trees. Shaky. Small. Ashamed. I heard you. And I was afraid. Because I was naked. So I hid. The words hung heavy. Not just confession, but confession warped by shame. And God, with the tenderness of a father, and the ache of betrayal, asked, Who told you? You were naked? Did you eat from the tree I commanded you not to? No apology. No sorrow. Just blame. The woman you gave me. She gave me the fruit. A subtle twist. Not just blaming Eve, but blaming God. And Eve? She passed it on. The serpent tricked me. Finger pointing. Excuses. Distance. And for the first time, God looked into eyes that couldn't meet his. He saw the fracture. Not just in behavior, but in relationship. In trust. Still, he spoke. To the serpent first. The tempter. The deceiver. Cursed are you. On your belly you will crawl. Dust will be your food. And there will be enmity between you and the woman. Between your offspring and hers. But hear this. One day, a child will come. You will strike his heel, but he will crush your head. A prophecy. A promise. A war declared in the garden. Then to Eve. Pain. Longing. Desire tangled in sorrow. Then to Adam. The ground would resist him. Sweat would feed the earth. Life would become labor. And one day, His body would return to the dust from which it was shaped. And yet, in the middle of the wreckage, in the center of the consequence, God did something unexpected. He covered them, not with leaves, but with skins. Warm, tangible, sacrificial. An animal had to die. Blood had to be spilled, so their shame could be covered. The first sacrifice. Grace. Woven into judgment. But Eden was no longer home. So he led them out. Out of peace. Out of presence. Out of perfection. He stood at the edge of a broken paradise. And when they crossed the threshold, he placed cherubim, mighty, radiant, terrifying, to guard the way back. Flaming swords. Spinning. Burning. Not out of spite, but protection. Because to re-enter the garden without holiness would be to die. The way was sealed, but not forgotten. Because even as the gates closed, a whisper lingered in the air. A promise still alive. One day, the way would open again. Not through striving. Not through fig leaves. But through a Savior. Through a man who would walk among thorns. Not trees. Who would sweat blood. Not just labor for bread. Who would climb a hill. Not to pluck forbidden fruit, but to hang on cursed wood. Who would take the serpent's bite and crush its head? Who would cry out, "It is finished," so shame could finally end. And that torn veil, ripped from top to bottom, was the beginning of Eden returning, not just as a place, but as a person, as presence. God, not waiting in a garden, but rushing into the wilderness to find us, to call again. To those who answer, "Where are you?" He doesn't shame. He doesn't scold. He clothes them with righteousness, with grace, with himself. And slowly, step by step, the way home begins again. Later that day, the garden grew quiet. The wind slowed. Birds stopped singing. Even the leaves seemed to hold their breath. And then, footsteps. Not thunderous. Not angry. But steady. Familiar. God walked through the garden. He had done this many times before. But this time, the joy was missing. His voice echoed like a heartbeat through the trees. "Adam, where are you?" Silence. Then, a rustle in the brush. A figure emerged slowly. Head bowed. Eyes wet. It was Adam. He didn't run. He didn't reach out. He whispered, "I heard you. And I was afraid. Because I was naked. So I hid." God paused. Not because he didn't know, but because Adam needed to say it. "Who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree I commanded you not to?" Adam's shoulders tensed. He didn't lie. But he didn't take the weight either. "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit." Blame. Wrapped in truth, but soaked in cowardice. God turned to Eve. Her voice trembled. "The serpent. He tricked me. And I ate." And for a moment, all was still. No thunder. No lightning. Just grief. Deep. Raw. Divine. God sighed. Not in anger, but in sorrow. A sigh that carried the weight of broken trust, of shattered intimacy, of innocence lost. He turned to the serpent first. His words were firm. Final. "Because you've done this, you are cursed. You'll crawl on your belly. Lick dust for the rest of your days. There will be enmity between your offspring and hers. And one day, her child will crush your head, but you will strike his heel. A prophecy. A war. A future. He turned to Eve. His voice softened, but didn't remove the cost. Your pain will multiply in childbirth. It will hurt, but your heart will still long for your husband. Then to Adam, because you listened to her voice instead of mine. The ground is cursed because of you. Thorns, weeds, sweat and struggle will follow you. You'll fight for food from soil that once gave freely. And in the end, you'll return to the very dust I formed you from. It was justice, and it was heartbreak. They had chosen death, not instantly, but inevitably. And then, God did something no one expected. He stepped closer, took skins from a slain animal, warm, soft, stained by sacrifice, and made clothes for them. Not fig leaves, not patches of shame, but a covering, a gesture of mercy, of care, of love that refused to let shame win completely. It was the first shedding of blood, the first sign that something would have to die, to cover what was broken. And still, they couldn't stay. God led them to the edge of Eden. The gates loomed, and behind them, the garden still bloomed, but not for them. They looked back, hearts breaking, and God did too. He placed angels at the entrance, with flaming swords, not out of cruelty, but protection. Because if they returned and ate from the tree of life in this state, they'd be trapped in death forever. So God closed the gate, but not his heart. They stepped into a wild, waiting world. Into dust. Into thorns. Into pain. But not alone. Because though Eden was behind them, God went with them. And so, it happened. Not with thunder. Not with fire. But with silence. A quiet, crushing silence. God led them out. Out of Eden. Out of the dream. Out of the place where heaven once touched earth. Out of the garden, where they walked with him. Without shame. Without fear. Now, their backs turned. Their hearts heavy. Their steps slow. Behind them, the trees whispered. The river glistened one last time. And the light began to fade. And at the edge of Eden, God drew a line. A sword of flame appeared in the air. Not symbolic. Real. Alive. It spun. Swift and wild. As if it had a mind of its own. Blocking every direction. Turning on all sides. A blade of warning. A wall of mercy. And beside it stood angels. Not the kind painted on ceilings, but beings of fire. Eyes like storms. Wings stretched wide. Unmoving. Cherubim. Warriors of glory. Not to punish, but to protect. You may not return. Not like this. Because behind them, still glowing in the shadows, stood the tree of life. Its fruit shimmered. Its branches stretched into eternity. But now, forever was a danger. To live forever in rebellion was not salvation. It was torment. So God sealed the way. Not out of wrath, but out of mercy. And Adam and Eve, they walked forward, step by step, into exile. The world was no longer soft. The breeze no longer sweet. The soil clawed at their feet. The sky felt higher, colder, The animals no longer bowed in peace. Some ran. Some stared. Some hunted. The world itself seemed to mourn what was lost, as if all of creation had witnessed the fall, and now bore its scars. Thorns grew where roses once danced. Pain pulsed in every breath. Hunger, sweat, decay. Death was no longer a myth. It was a shadow, waiting. But even in the wilderness, God did not walk away. He was quieter now, but present. He still whispered in winds, in dreams, in wonder. He gave them work, not to punish them, but to root them, to give them meaning, to teach their hands what brokenness could become. He gave them each other, flesh of flesh, bone of bone, now bound not just by love, but by grief, by survival, and in time. He gave them children, new life, a second chance, proof that even in ruin, beauty could still rise. And they told stories, by firelight, by starlight, of what once was, and what might be again. They told of the garden, of the voice, of the tree, of the choice, of the serpent, of the promise. One day, they said, one will come, a son, a savior. He will crush the serpent, undo the curse, bring us home. It wasn't a myth. It was a seed, planted deep in sorrow, watered with tears, waiting to bloom. And though Eden's gates were sealed, hope was not, because God was not gone. His presence still flickered, in the cry of a newborn child, in the hush of twilight, in the fire that kept them warm. He was no longer walking beside them, but he was not far, watching, grieving, loving, waiting for the day when the promise would rise, in flesh, in blood, in a cry from a manger, waiting for the day when the gates would open again, when paradise lost would become paradise found, when Eden would no longer be a memory, but a reality, restored. So, what do we learn from this ancient story? It's not just about fruit, not just a garden, not even just a serpent. It's about something deeper, something that still echoes in our bones. It's about trust and the fracture of it, about the moment humanity looked at God and quietly said, I think I know better. And the cost was everything. But even there, in that broken moment, when innocence died and shame first stirred, there was something else. Love, still breathing, still reaching. Mercy, woven into the curse. And a promise, soft but unshakable, that this would not be the end. Someone would come, not just to fix it, but to undo it, to crush the serpent, to silence the lie, to reopen the gate, to make a way back, back to life, back to wholeness, back to the garden, but not just the old garden, a new one, where there is no more hiding, no more shame, no more fear. This is the story of Adam and Eve, but it's also ours, mine, yours, because we all hear the whisper, we all feel the pull, we all know what it means to reach for something that promises more, but delivers less. We all know what it means to run from God and hope He doesn't notice. But the story doesn't end in the shadows. It ends in pursuit, in love chasing after us, and a Savior, taking the curse into his hands so we could be free. The Bible doesn't just tell us what happened. It tells us what still happens and what still can happen. We've been exiled, but we are not abandoned. The gate may have closed, but heaven never did. There's a way back, and it's open. Not through perfection, but through grace. Not by climbing, but by trusting. And that is the real story. Not just the fall, but the return, the redemption. If this story stirred something in you, you're not alone. These ancient words still breathe, still speak, still call, and we'll keep listening. One story at a time. Subscribe if your heart longs for more, and I'll meet you in the next story. Until then, remember, even when we fall, God still walks in the garden and asks, "Where are you?"